In the small mountain town of Stone Creek, Colorado, struggling single father Marcus Brown hides a secret that could change everything. The quiet mechanic at Stewart's Auto Repair was once a brilliant aerospace engineer, but now he barely scrapes by fighting to keep his asthmatic daughter Isabella healthy and their home from foreclosure. When arrogant tech billionaire Victor Fairfax arrives with an experimental hybrid engine that has stumped 3 major engineering firms, he offers $50,000 to any mechanic who can fix it, or demands a $5,000 penalty from those who fail. What follows is an extraordinary David versus Goliath battle that ultimately proves sometimes the most impossible problems require the most unexpected solutions, and that true expertise can never be bought, only earned through years of dedication and sacrifice. Quick pause before we continue. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The morning sun cast long shadows across Stewart's Auto Repair as Marcus Brown wiped grease from his hands with a worn red rag. His dark hair, streaked with premature gray at 34, caught the light filtering through the garage's dusty windows. The familiar sounds of small-town life drifted in from Main Street, the hiss of air brakes from Mike Green's delivery truck, the chatter of early customers heading into Carmen's Corner Diner, and the distant hum of machinery from the lumber mill. On the outskirts of town, Marcus knelt beside a rusted Ford pickup, its engine compartment open like a patient on an operating table. The truck belonged to Jim Bradley, a retired mechanic who taught half the town's boys how to change their first oil filter. Now arthritis kept Jim's hands from the work he'd loved for 40 years, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence of someone who understood machinery. "Timing belt's shot," Marcus said, running his fingers along the frayed rubber. "She's been compensating for weeks, but that knocking you've been hearing means the pistons are starting to kiss the valves." Jim Bradley nodded slowly, his weathered face creased with concern. "How much we talking, son?" Marcus calculated quickly in his head, factoring in parts and labor, then knocked 20% off because he knew Jim was living on a fixed income. $400 should cover it. I can get the belt from Kevin Parker's place this afternoon, have her running smooth by tomorrow evening. Appreciate you being straight with me, Marcus. Not like some shops that had tried to sell me a whole new engine. The comment hung between them, both men understanding the unspoken reference to Peterson's garage across town, where tourists got charged triple for simple repairs. Marcus had built his reputation on honesty, even when it meant smaller profits. It was one of the few things from his old life that still served him well. The bell above the garage door chimed as Tommy Stewart shuffled in, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee from Carmen's Diner. At 58, Tommy moved with the deliberate pace of a man whose back had felt the weight of every engine he'd ever lifted. His grey beard was perpetually stained with motor oil, and his flannel shirts had seen better decades. But his loyalty to his employees ran deeper than the Colorado mountain routes. "Morning, Jim," Tommy said, handing Marcus one of the coffees. "Marcus giving you the straight story on that old Ford?" "Always does," Jim replied, pulling out a crumpled $20 bill. "I'll put this down as a deposit. Rest when you're finished." Marcus accepted the money reluctantly. He knew Jim probably needed that 20 for groceries, but pride was a currency more valuable than cash in a town like Stone Creek. After Jim left, promising to return the next evening, Marcus took a long sip of coffee and surveyed the garage that had become his second home. 3 bays filled the space, each equipped with hydraulic lifts that had seen better years. Tool chests lined the walls, their drawers labeled in Tommy's careful handwriting. A small office occupied the back corner, its desk buried under invoices, parts catalogs, and the ever-present stack of bills that Tommy pretended weren't overdue. The entire operation ran on credit extended by suppliers who'd known Tommy since he'd opened the shop 30 years ago. "We need to talk," Tommy said, settling his bulk onto a rolling stool that squeaked under his weight. Marcus set down his coffee cup, recognizing the tone. These conversations usually involved money they didn't have or work they couldn't afford to turn down. "What's on your mind?" "Got a call from Lisa Coleman at the bank yesterday. She's asking about our loan status, wondering if we're planning to make the October payment. We made September. Barely. And that was with you working 60-hour weeks and me deferring my own salary." Tommy's voice carried the weight of 3 decades in business, most of them spent walking the razor's edge between success and failure. "Son, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer." Marcus nodded, though his stomach was already tightening with anticipation. "Your daughter's medical bills, the mortgage on your place, the truck payment. How behind are you?" The question hit harder because Tommy asked it with genuine concern rather than judgment. Marcus had worked for him for 3 years, ever since arriving in Stone Creek with a 10-year-old daughter, a pickup truck full of belongings, and a resume that listed general maintenance as his most recent employment. Tommy had never pressed for details about Marcus's past, accepting him based on his skill with engines and his willingness to work. "Behind enough," Marcus admitted. "Dr. Reed's been patient with Isabella's treatments, but patience doesn't pay. For medications, the bank's talking foreclosure if I can't catch up by Christmas." Tommy absorbed this information with the stoicism of a man who'd faced his own financial crises. "What if I told you there might be an opportunity, something that could solve both our problems?" Before Marcus could respond, the rumble of a powerful engine echoed from the street outside. Both men turned toward the garage door as a black Bentley Continental GT rolled to a stop in front of Stewart's Auto Repair. The car's pristine paint job and chrome details seemed almost alien against the backdrop of Stone Creek's modest main street. The driver's door opened, and a man emerged who looked like he'd stepped from the pages of a business magazine. Victor Fairfax stood 6 feet tall, with silver hair that had never known a bad haircut, and clothes that cost more than most people in Stone Creek made in a month. His tailored suit was navy blue with subtle pinstripes, his shoes Italian leather that had never touched dirt, and his watch caught the morning sunlight with the kind of gleam that suggested serious money. Behind the Bentley, a large truck hauled, a custom trailer, both bearing the logo of Fairfax Industries. The trailer's sides were emblazoned with technical diagrams and the company slogan, "Engineering Tomorrow's Solutions." "Well," Tommy said quietly, "speak of the devil." Victor Fairfax approached the garage with the confident stride of a man accustomed to having doors opened for him. His pale blue eyes swept the interior of Stewart's Auto Repair with the calculating gaze of someone assessing value. When those eyes settled on Marcus and Tommy, they carried the subtle condescension of wealth. "Evaluating labor. Gentlemen," Fairfax said, his voice carrying the crisp diction of expensive education, "I'm Victor Fairfax. I believe you received my associate's call yesterday about a potential business arrangement." Tommy nodded slowly. "Mr. Fairfax, wasn't sure you'd actually show up." "I make it a point to honor my commitments, Mr. Stewart. May I assume this is your establishment?" "For 30 years now, this is Marcus Brown, my lead mechanic." Fairfax's gaze lingered on Marcus for a moment longer than courtesy required, as if trying to read something in his face. "Mr. Brown, your reputation precedes you. I'm told you have a talent for solving difficult mechanical problems." Marcus felt a familiar, uncomfortable sensation, the feeling of being examined under a microscope. "I fix what's broken. Nothing more complicated than that. Modesty. I appreciate that in a craftsman." Fairfax's smile carried all the warmth of a business contract. "Shall we discuss why I've come to your charming town?" Tommy gestured toward the office, but Fairfax shook his head. "Actually, I prefer to conduct this conversation in the open. Transparency, you understand." He walked to the trailer and spoke briefly with the driver. who began the process of unloading whatever cargo had brought a billionaire to Stone Creek. The mechanical whir of hydraulics filled the air as the trailer's rear door opened, revealing a sophisticated piece of machinery secured with professional-grade restraints. "Gentlemen," Fairfax announced, "I'd like you to meet the future of automotive propulsion." The engine that emerged from the trailer defied easy categorization. It combined elements Marcus recognized: a traditional combustion block, fuel injection systems, exhaust manifolds, with components that seemed to belong in a laboratory rather than a garage. Sensors and monitoring equipment clustered around key connection points, and the entire assembly was mounted on a custom test stand that allowed access from multiple angles. "Hybrid propulsion system," Fairfax explained as the engine was wheeled into the garage. "Combines traditional internal combustion with advanced electric motor integration. The goal is to achieve the power of a conventional V8 with the efficiency of a four-cylinder hybrid." Marcus circled the engine slowly, his trained eye taking in details that most people would miss. The craftsmanship was exceptional, each component precisely machined and fitted. But there was something else, something in the way certain parts were configured that suggested deeper complexity than Fairfax was revealing. "Beautiful work," Marcus said honestly. "What's the problem?" Fairfax's confident expression flickered slightly. "3 of the most respected engineering firms in the country have examined this engine. Each spent weeks attempting to diagnose a performance issue that has prevented successful integration. The engine runs, but it fails to achieve the power output that our calculations predict. And you think a small-town garage can solve what they couldn't?" "I think," Fairfax said carefully, "that sometimes fresh perspective can illuminate solutions that expertise might overlook. I'm prepared to offer $50,000 to any mechanic who can identify and resolve the performance issue." The figure hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt Tommy's sharp intake of breath beside him and knew his boss was calculating how many months of bills that money would cover. "And if we can't fix it?" Marcus asked. Fairfax's smile returned, colder now. "Then you pay me $5,000 for wasting my time. A penalty for presumption, you might say." The terms were harsh, but Marcus understood the psychology behind them. Fairfax wasn't really offering a business deal. He was making a bet. A bet that small-town mechanics couldn't succeed where highly educated engineers had failed. The money was secondary to the satisfaction of proving his superiority. Tommy cleared his throat. "Mr. Fairfax, we appreciate the opportunity, but $5,000 is more than this shop makes in some months. We can't afford to gamble that kind of money." "Of course you can't," Fairfax agreed smoothly, "which is precisely why the offer is structured as it is. Success rewards ambition. Failure punishes overreach. It's the fundamental principle of capitalism." Marcus continued his examination of the engine, his mind automatically cataloging systems and connections. Something about the configuration nagged at him, a sense of familiarity that he couldn't quite place. He'd seen similar setups before, but where? "How long do we have to decide?" Tommy asked. "I'm staying at the Stone Creek Inn for 3 days. The engine remains here during that time, available for your examination. On Thursday morning, I'll require your final answer." Fairfax adjusted his expensive watch and prepared to leave. "One more thing, gentlemen. Word of this arrangement will spread through your community quickly. I suspect other local mechanics will be interested in attempting the challenge. The first to solve the problem claims the prize." With that parting shot, Victor Fairfax climbed back into his Bentley and drove away, leaving Marcus and Tommy staring at an engine worth more than their garage and a decision that could save or destroy everything they'd worked for. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The silence that followed Victor. Fairfax's departure stretched like a taut wire between Marcus and Tommy. The hybrid engine sat in the center of the garage like an expensive puzzle, its polished components reflecting the overhead fluorescent lights. Marcus found himself drawn to it despite his better judgment, his fingers itching to explore the intricate network of sensors and control modules. $50,000, Tommy said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. That's more money than I've seen at one time since I bought this place. Marcus nodded absently, his attention focused on a particular cluster of components near the engine's electrical integration point. The configuration triggered a memory he'd spent 3 years trying to suppress. Advanced propulsion systems, variable geometry intake manifolds, hybrid power distribution networks. The terminology floated through his mind like ghosts from another life. "Marcus, you listening to me?" "Sorry, what?" Tommy studied his lead mechanic with the sharp eye of someone who'd spent decades reading people. "I said, what do you think? Is this thing even fixable?" Before Marcus could answer, the garage door chimed again. Jake Rogers entered, still wearing his Peterson's garage uniform, the competing shop's logo emblazoned on his chest. Jake was 38. Built like the high school linebacker he'd once been, with calloused hands and an honest face that had never learned to hide his emotions. "Heard through the grapevine that some big shot rolled up with a fancy engine," Jake said, his eyes immediately drawn to the hybrid system. "Holy hell, would you look at that thing?" "Word travels fast," Tommy observed. "Carmen's got half the town talking about it already. Black Bentley with a truck full of equipment doesn't exactly go unnoticed around here." Jake circled the engine slowly, his expression mixing admiration with bewilderment. "What's the story?" Tommy explained Fairfax's proposition while Jake listened with growing excitement. The $50,000 prize clearly captured his imagination, but the $5,000 penalty sobered him quickly. $5,000, Jake muttered. "That's my truck payment and mortgage for 3 months." "Which is exactly why it's designed that way," Marcus said quietly. "Fairfax isn't looking for solutions. He's looking to prove a point." "What kind of point?" "That money and education matter more than skill and experience. That small-town mechanics should know their place." Jake's jaw tightened at the implication. "So we just let him walk all over us? Prove him right?" "We don't have a choice," Tommy said pragmatically. "None of us can afford to lose $5,000 on a gamble." Marcus continued his examination of the engine, his mind involuntarily cataloging systems and relationships. The hybrid integration wasn't just sophisticated. It was elegant in a way that suggested deep understanding of both mechanical and electrical engineering principles. Whoever had designed this understood power distribution at a level that most mechanics never encountered. The garage door opened again, admitting Carmen Green, whose diner served as Stone Creek's unofficial information hub. At 42, Carmen possessed the kind of warm authority that made people confess their troubles over coffee and pie. Her practical clothes and no-nonsense demeanor reflected a woman who'd built her business through hard work and genuine care for her community. "Boys," she said, nodding to each of them in turn, "figured you'd want to know what that fancy fellow's been saying around town." "Do tell," Tommy said wearily. "He's been holding court at the diner for the past hour, telling anyone who'll listen about his generous offer to the local mechanics. Made sure to mention that he doesn't expect any of you to actually succeed." Jake's face flushed red. "The arrogant son of a—" "Easy," Carmen interrupted smoothly. "There's more. He's also been asking questions about Marcus specifically. Wanted to know how long he's been in town, where he came from before Stewart's, whether he has any formal training." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "What did you tell him?" "Same thing everyone else did, that you showed up 3 years ago with your daughter, work harder than anyone has a right to, and keep to yourself." Carmen's eyes narrowed slightly. "But he seemed mighty interested in your background for someone who just wants his engine fixed." The observation hung in the air like a question mark. Marcus had worked carefully to build a life in Stone Creek that didn't invite scrutiny, but Fairfax's arrival threatened the careful anonymity he'd constructed. "I should get back," Jake said reluctantly. "Peterson's expecting me to finish Mrs. Walsh's transmission before 5. But Marcus, if you decide to take a shot at this thing, I'd be willing to help. Off the clock, of course." After Jake left, Carmen lingered, her experienced eyes studying Marcus with maternal concern. "Honey, you've got that look you get when Isabella's having a bad day with her breathing. What's really going on here?" Marcus glanced at Tommy, who was pretending to organize receipts while obviously listening to every word. These people had become his family over the past 3 years, the closest thing to home he'd known since Rachel's death. But explaining his past would require revealing secrets he'd sworn to keep buried. "It's complicated," Marcus said finally. "Most important things are that engine's got you spooked, and it's not just about the money." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of a small motorcycle engine announced another arrival. Bobby Wrench Miller, 29 years old and eager to prove himself, burst through the door with the enthusiasm of youth and the confidence of inexperience. His nickname came from his habit of carrying tools everywhere, convinced that mechanical problems were just puzzles waiting for the right wrench. "Mr. Stewart, you've got to let me try that engine," Bobby said without preamble. "I've been reading about hybrid systems online all morning. I think I know what the problem might be." Tommy sighed deeply. "Bobby, this isn't some YouTube project. That's $1 million piece of equipment." "But $50,000, Bobby pressed. "That's enough to open my own shop, maybe even hire Jake away from Peterson's. We could compete with the big boys." Marcus watched the young mechanic's enthusiasm with a mixture of admiration and concern. Bobby possessed raw talent and genuine passion for automotive work, but passion without experience could be dangerous, especially with stakes this high. "What do you think the problem is?" Marcus asked gently. Bobby launched into an explanation involving fuel mixture ratios and electrical timing that demonstrated both his theoretical knowledge and his practical limitations. His diagnosis wasn't wrong exactly, but it addressed symptoms rather than root causes. It was the kind of surface-level analysis that might impress customers but wouldn't solve complex engineering problems. "That's good thinking," Marcus said diplomatically, "but these hybrid systems are more complicated than they appear. The integration between mechanical and electrical components creates relationships that aren't always obvious." "You sound like you know something about them," Carmen observed quietly. The comment struck closer to home than Marcus preferred. "I've read a few articles. Technology is changing fast these days." Bobby's excitement remained undimmed. "But you'll try it, right? I mean, if anyone in town can figure it out, it's you. Everyone says you can diagnose problems just by listening to an engine run." The praise made Marcus uncomfortable, partly because it was accurate and partly because it reminded him of skills he'd rather forget. In his previous life, colleagues had marveled at his intuitive understanding of complex systems, his ability to see patterns and relationships that others missed. It was a gift that had made him valuable and ultimately cost him everything. The afternoon wore on, with a steady stream of visitors, each drawn by curiosity about the mysterious engine and the billionaire's challenge. Dr. Patricia Reed stopped by during her lunch break, ostensibly to check on Marcus, but really to satisfy her own curiosity about the mechanical marvel. Sheriff Dan Hayes made an official visit to ensure everything was legitimate. Though his interest in the engine's technical specifications suggested personal fascination as well, by 4 o'clock, word had spread throughout Stone Creek and beyond. 3 mechanics from the neighboring town of Cedar Falls had driven over to examine the engine, each convinced they could succeed where others had failed. The garage had become an impromptu social center, with people offering theories, advice, and increasingly desperate justifications for taking the risk. Marcus found himself studying the engine with growing unease. Not because he couldn't understand it, but because he could. The design philosophy behind the hybrid integration reminded him of work he'd done years ago, concepts he'd helped develop in a different life. The more he examined the system, the more familiar it became, until recognition hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just any experimental engine, it was based on research he'd helped pioneer. The realization left him shaken. Rachel had worked on hybrid propulsion systems during their time together at Aerospace Dynamics Corporation. Her theoretical work on power distribution networks had been groundbreaking, laying the foundation for practical applications that others would develop after her death. This engine incorporated principles she'd discovered, refined through years of additional research and development. "Marcus, you okay?" Tommy asked, noticing his employee's sudden pallor. "I need some air," Marcus managed, stepping outside into the cool mountain afternoon. The streets of Stone Creek stretched before him, familiar and comforting in their ordinariness. This was the life he'd chosen for Isabella, away from the pressures and complications of his former career. Here, he could be just Marcus Brown, mechanic and father, not the man who'd once stood at the cutting edge of aerospace engineering. But Victor Fairfax's arrival threatened that carefully constructed simplicity. The billionaire's questions about his background suggested more than casual interest. If Fairfax had researched the engine's theoretical foundation, he might have encountered Rachel's published papers. From there, it would be a short step to discovering her widower and his current location. The thought chilled Marcus more than the mountain air. He'd left his old life behind for good reasons, reasons that involved more than just grief over Rachel's death. Corporate espionage, stolen, research, accusations that had never been proven, but had destroyed his reputation anyway. He'd come to Stone Creek to disappear, to give Isabella a normal childhood, away from the toxic world of high-stakes engineering. Now that world had found him again, wearing the face of an arrogant billionaire and offering exactly the kind of challenge he couldn't resist and couldn't afford to accept. The garage door opened behind him, and Carmen emerged, carrying 2 cups of coffee from her perpetual supply. She handed him one without speaking, understanding that sometimes silence was more valuable than conversation. "That engine's got you rattled," she said finally. "It reminds me of things I'd rather forget." Good things or bad things? Marcus considered. The question. His work with Rachel had been the most fulfilling period of his career, a time when they'd pushed the boundaries of what was possible together. But it had also led to the corporate warfare that had destroyed his reputation and contributed to the stress that had weakened Rachel's immune system before her final illness. "Both," he said honestly. Carmen nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Most things worth doing are like that. The question is whether the good outweighs the bad." "I'm not sure it does." "Then why are you still staring at that engine like it holds the secrets of the universe?" The question caught him off guard because it was accurate. Despite his reservations, despite the risks, he couldn't stop thinking about the hybrid system. Part of him wanted to understand how his and Rachel's theoretical work had been translated into practical reality. Part of him needed to know whether their ideas had been properly implemented or corrupted by commercial interests. Because it might, he admitted quietly. Carmen smiled, the expression warm with understanding. "Honey, I've been watching people wrestle with their demons for 20 years. Sometimes the only way through is straight ahead, and sometimes straight ahead leads off a cliff. True, but you won't know which until you try." Inside the garage, the hybrid engine waited like a mechanical Pandora's box, filled with possibilities that Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to explore. But as the afternoon shadows lengthened across Stone Creek's quiet streets, he found himself increasingly certain that he would have to try. Not for the money, though his family desperately needed it. Not for the challenge, though it called to parts of himself he'd thought permanently buried. Not for the chance, though it meant risking everything. He wanted to know whether the hybrid engine would He would try because somewhere in that complex network of sensors and control modules lay the culmination of work he and Rachel had started together. And perhaps, in solving Fairfax's impossible problem, he could finally make peace with the brilliant engineer he used to be. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table helping Isabella with her homework while the day's events churned through his mind. The modest two-bedroom house they rented on Elm Street had become their sanctuary, filled with the comfortable chaos of single parenthood. Isabella's art projects covered the refrigerator, her school books scattered across the coffee table, and her inhaler always within reach on the kitchen counter. "Dad, you're not listening," Isabella said, her voice carrying the patient exasperation of a 10-year-old correcting an adult. "Sorry, sweetheart. What was the question?" "Mrs. Turner wants us to write about someone we admire and explain why. I picked you, but I don't know what to write about your job before we moved here." The innocent question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Isabella had been 7 when they'd left their previous life behind, old enough to remember fragments, but young enough to accept his explanations about needing a fresh start after her mother's death. She'd never pressed for details about his work at Aerospace Dynamics Corporation, accepting his transition to automotive repair as simply what happened when families needed to rebuild. "What do you remember about before?" Marcus asked carefully. Isabella frowned in concentration, her dark eyes so much like Rachel's that it sometimes took his breath away. "You and Mom worked together on important things. You had big computers and lots of papers with drawings. People came to ask you questions about flying machines. That's right, we designed engines for aircraft, systems that helped planes fly more efficiently. Like the engine that came to Mr. Stewart's shop today?" Marcus's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. "You heard about that? Emma Walsh's mom works at the bank. She said some rich man brought a special engine and offered lots of money to fix it. Is that true?" The small-town grapevine had reached even the elementary school playground. Marcus wondered what other details had circulated, what questions might eventually make their way back to Isabella about her father's past. "It's true. The engine is very complicated, more advanced than what we usually work on. But you could fix it, couldn't you? You're really good with engines." The faith in her voice was absolute, the kind of trust that children give their parents before the world teaches them that adults have limitations. Marcus had spent 3 years being worthy of that trust, keeping their lives stable and predictable despite the financial pressures that constantly threatened their security. "Maybe," he said honestly, "but it would be risky. If I tried and failed, we'd owe money we don't have." Isabella considered this with the seriousness that chronic illness had taught her. She understood money troubles in ways that most children didn't, knew that her medications were expensive and that her father sometimes skipped meals to ensure she had everything she needed. "But if you succeeded, then we'd have enough money to catch up on bills and maybe even move to a bigger place, somewhere with a yard where you could have a dog." Her eyes lit up at the possibility. Isabella had wanted a dog for years, but their current rental agreement prohibited pets, and Marcus couldn't afford the additional expenses anyway. It was one of many small dreams deferred by their circumstances. The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Dr. Patricia Reed's voice carried the professional concern that always made Marcus's heart race. "Marcus, I need to discuss Isabella's treatment plan. Her lung function tests this week showed some concerning patterns. We might need to adjust her medication regimen." "What kind of adjustments?" "A newer inhaler system that's more effective but significantly more expensive. Her insurance covers part of it, but you'd be looking at about $300 monthly out of pocket." Marcus closed his eyes, calculating quickly. $300 additional per month would break their already strained budget completely. Even with overtime at the garage, he couldn't cover the extra expense without falling behind on other bills. How long can we wait before making the change? I'd prefer to start immediately, but I understand the financial constraints. Perhaps we could try the adjustment in a month or two, see how she responds to increased doses of her current medication in the meantime. After hanging up, Marcus found Isabella watching him with the intuitive understanding that children develop when their health affects family finances. She didn't ask questions, but her expression clearly communicated that she'd grasped the essential problem. "The new medicine costs more," she said quietly. "We'll figure it out. We always do." But even as he said it, Marcus knew that their ability to figure it out was reaching its limits. The conversation with Dr. Reed had crystallized what he'd been avoiding all day. Fairfax's challenge wasn't just an opportunity anymore, it was becoming a necessity. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Rebecca Fairfax knocked on the garage door at 8 o'clock sharp, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing clothes that managed to be both expensive and practical. At 28, she possessed her father's intelligence, but none of his arrogance. Her manner suggesting someone accustomed to solving problems through collaboration rather than intimidation. "Mr. Brown, Mr. Stewart," she said, nodding to each man. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I wanted to apologize for my father's behavior. Yesterday, Tommy accepted the offered coffee warily. "No offense taken, miss. Business is business." "That's generous of you, but I know my father can be difficult. His success has made him impatient with people he considers beneath his level of expertise." Marcus studied Victor Fairfax's daughter, noting the carefully neutral language that suggested deeper family tensions. "Are you here in an official capacity?" "Officially, I'm his chief liaison for community relations. Unofficially, I'm trying to prevent him from completely alienating everyone in your town." Rebecca's smile held genuine warmth. "He has a tendency to create enemies when he should be building partnerships. And what's your stake in this?" "I designed part of that engine's control system. The electrical integration protocols that manage power distribution between the combustion and electric components." Pride colored her voice as she spoke about her work. "It's taken 3 years to develop, and frankly, I'm frustrated that we can't get it working properly." The admission surprised Marcus. Corporate executives rarely revealed technical failures so openly, especially to small-town mechanics they'd just met. "What exactly is the problem?" Tommy asked. Rebecca glanced around the garage, ensuring they were alone before answering. "The engine produces power exactly as our calculations predict, but it can't sustain that output under load. After 30 seconds of maximum performance, efficiency drops by 40%. None of the consulting firms we've hired can explain why." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The symptom Rebecca described pointed toward a specific type of integration. Failure, one he'd encountered during his work with Rachel on prototype propulsion systems. It wasn't a mechanical problem in the traditional sense, but rather a mismatch between theoretical design and practical implementation. "Have you checked the harmonic resonance between the electric motorcycles and the combustion timing?" The question slipped out before Marcus could stop himself, drawing sharp looks from both Rebecca and Tommy. "That's actually one of the theories we investigated," Rebecca said slowly. "But the consulting engineers concluded that the resonance patterns were within acceptable parameters. Acceptable for individual systems, maybe. But when you integrate electric and combustion power sources, harmonic frequencies can create interference. Patterns that don't show up in standard testing." Marcus realized he'd revealed more technical knowledge than a small-town mechanic should possess, but Rebecca's excitement was evident. "You're talking about polyrhythmic interference in power coupling systems. That's graduate-level engineering theory." "I read a lot," Marcus said weakly. Tommy was staring at his lead mechanic with new understanding. 3 years of working together, and he'd never heard Marcus discuss engineering theory with such fluency and precision. "Mr. Brown," Rebecca said. "Carefully, my father may have misjudged the level of expertise available in Stone Creek. Would you be willing to examine our engine more closely? Not as part of his challenge, just as a professional consultation." The offer was tempting, but Marcus recognized the trap. Any detailed examination would require him to demonstrate knowledge that would raise questions about his background. Rebecca Fairfax was intelligent enough to recognize advanced engineering skills when she saw them. "I appreciate the offer, but I've got regular work to finish first." Rebecca nodded, though disappointment was clear in her expression. "Of course, but the offer stands if you change your mind." After she left, Tommy cornered Marcus in the office, his expression demanding explanations. "Son, in 30 years of running, this garage, I've never heard anyone talk about harmonic resonance and polyrhythmic interference. Want to tell me where a small-town mechanic learns graduate-level engineering theory?" Marcus had known this moment would come eventually. The careful anonymity he'd maintained for 3 years was crumbling under the weight of Fairfax's challenge and his own inability to remain silent when faced with an interesting technical problem. "It's complicated, Tommy. Most things worth knowing. But I've been straight with you for 3 years. Never asked questions about your past because I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. Seems like maybe that time has come." The office felt smaller suddenly, filled with the weight of secrets that Marcus had carried alone for too long. Tommy deserved the truth, or at least part of it. The man had given him work when he'd needed it most, trusted him with responsibilities that kept the garage profitable, and never questioned the obvious gaps in his employment history. Before Isabella and I came to Stone Creek, I worked in aerospace engineering, advanced propulsion systems, hybrid power integration, experimental aircraft engines. Tommy absorbed this information without visible surprise, as if expensive technical knowledge simply explained what he'd observed over their years working together. Good at it? Very good. My wife and I developed some of the theoretical framework that modern hybrid systems are based on. And you gave it up to fix pickup trucks and change oil filters? The question cut to the heart of Marcus's choices over the past 3 years. I gave it up because that world cost me everything that mattered. After Rachel died, staying in aerospace engineering meant fighting battles that would have destroyed Isabella's childhood. Tommy nodded slowly, his weathered face reflecting understanding rather than judgment. Corporate politics, among other things, research theft, industrial espionage, accusations about stolen intellectual property. Nothing was ever proven, but the damage to my reputation was complete. I couldn't get work at any major firm, couldn't contribute to projects that required security clearance, so you disappeared. So I gave my daughter a chance at a normal life, away from lawyers and corporate investigators and the kind of people who see families as collateral damage in business wars. The confession left Marcus feeling drained, but oddly relieved. For 3 years, he'd carried the weight of his hidden identity alone, never allowing himself to fully trust anyone with the complete truth about his past. "That engine out there," Tommy said quietly, "it's connected to your old work, isn't it? The theoretical foundation, yes. Rachel's research on power distribution networks, refined and developed by people who understood her ideas better than I gave them credit for. And you could fix it." It wasn't a question. Tommy had watched Marcus diagnose impossible problems for 3 years, had seen him identify solutions that other mechanics missed entirely. The only surprise was learning that his skills extended far beyond automotive repair. Probably, but fixing it would mean revealing everything I've worked to keep hidden. Fairfax is already asking questions about my background. If I demonstrate that level of technical expertise, it won't take him long to discover who I really am. And then, Then Isabella and I run again, find another town, start over with new names and a different story, because people like Victor Fairfax don't forget, and they don't forgive. Tommy was quiet for several minutes, his eyes focused on the garage floor as he processed everything Marcus had revealed. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the gravelly wisdom of 6 decades spent watching people make hard choices. Son, I don't pretend to understand corporate politics or engineering theory, but I know what it's like to build something worth protecting, and I know what it's like to watch it slip away because you're too proud or too scared to fight for it. This is different. Maybe, but that little girl of yours is going to need expensive medicine, and you're looking at foreclosure on your house by Christmas. Sometimes running away isn't an option anymore. The truth of Tommy's words settled over Marcus like a weight. He'd spent 3 years believing that anonymity and stability were the same thing, that keeping his past buried was the only way to protect Isabella's future. But now, faced with medical bills he couldn't afford and a challenge that could solve all their financial problems, he wondered whether he'd been protecting his daughter or simply protecting himself from facing the consequences of his former life. Outside in the garage, Fairfax's hybrid engine waited like a mechanical crossroads, offering a path back to the world Marcus had abandoned and the expertise he'd tried to forget. The choice was no longer whether to accept the challenge, but whether he was ready to reclaim the brilliant engineer he used to be, whatever the cost to the quiet life he'd built in Stone Creek. The next morning brought the first official challenger. To Victor Fairfax's engine, Carl Turbo Jackson arrived from Denver in a customized truck that announced his credentials to anyone within a mile radius. Racing decals covered every available surface, and his tool collection sparkled with the kind of precision equipment that professional motorsports demanded. At 45, Carl had built his reputation tuning engines for NASCAR teams and wealthy collectors who demanded perfection from their high-performance machines. Marcus watched from the office window as Carl strutted around the hybrid engine like a peacock displaying his plumage. Everything about the man screamed confidence, from his sponsor-covered jumpsuit to the way he dismissed Tommy's offer of assistance with a wave of his hand. "I've been working with hybrid racing systems for 5 years," Carl announced to the small crowd that had gathered. "These Silicon Valley types think they invented power integration, but we've been combining electric and combustion systems since before they learned to drive." Jake Rogers leaned against the workbench, his expression skeptical. "Racing hybrids are different from production systems. This thing's designed for efficiency, not pure speed." "Power is power," Carl replied dismissively. "The principles are identical, just scaled differently." Tommy emerged from the office carrying a clipboard and a pen. "Mr. Jackson, I need you to sign these liability waivers before you begin. Engines worth more than most people's houses." Carl scrawled his signature without reading the documents, his attention focused entirely on the mechanical challenge before him. He'd brought his own diagnostic equipment, computerized systems that could analyze engine performance in real time and identify problems that traditional mechanics might miss. "How long you planning to take?" Tommy asked. "Give me 4 hours. If I can't solve it by then, it can't be solved." The crowd settled in to watch, some placing informal bets on Carl's chances of success. Marcus found himself studying the Denver mechanics approach with professional interest, noting both the strengths and limitations of his methodology. Carl began with a systematic analysis of the engine's electronic systems, connecting his diagnostic computers to various access points throughout the hybrid assembly. The readings appeared on multiple screens, displaying graphs and numerical data that meant nothing to most observers, but spoke volumes to anyone with engineering training. "Electrical systems are nominal," Carl announced after 30 minutes of testing. Power distribution networks are functioning within design parameters. Problems got to be mechanical integration. He shifted his attention to the combustion components, checking compression ratios, valve timing, and fuel injection patterns. His movements were efficient and professional, each test following logically from the previous results. Marcus had to admit that Carl knew his business, even if his arrogance was off-putting. 2 hours into the diagnostic process, Carl's confidence began showing cracks. The engine's individual systems all tested perfectly, but the integration problems that had stumped 3 engineering firms remained mysteriously elusive. His computerized equipment could measure everything quantifiable about the engine's performance, but it couldn't explain why those measurements didn't translate into sustained power output. "This doesn't make sense," Carl muttered, scrolling through. Screens of data that should have revealed obvious solutions. Every component is functioning correctly, but the system performance is still degraded. Bobby Wrench Miller had been watching intently from the sidelines, absorbing every detail of Carl's approach. "Maybe the problem isn't with individual components," he suggested. "Maybe it's something about how they work together." Carl shot him a withering look. "Kid, I've been diagnosing engine problems since before you could hold a wrench. Integration. Issues show up in the data, and I'm not seeing anything abnormal." Marcus bit his tongue to avoid commenting. Carl's diagnostic approach was thorough, but fundamentally limited by its reliance on conventional testing methods. The kind of harmonic interference patterns that Marcus suspected wouldn't register on standard equipment because they occurred at frequencies and intervals that normal diagnostics weren't designed to detect. As the 3rd hour passed, Carl's professional composure began deteriorating. He'd tried everything in his considerable arsenal of troubleshooting techniques, but the engine's mysterious performance degradation remained unexplained. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air, and his movements became increasingly frantic. "There's got to be something I'm missing," he said, more to himself than to the watching crowd. "Some sensor that's giving false readings, some component that's failing intermittently." Sheriff Dan Hayes checked his watch and approached Tommy with obvious concern. "How much longer is this going to take? I've got 3 vehicles blocking Main Street, and people are starting to complain about the traffic." "Mr. Jackson said 4 hours. Tommy replied diplomatically. "We're almost there." Carl overheard the conversation, and his jaw tightened with frustration. "Fine. I'll make one more adjustment to the fuel mapping system, then fire it up and see what happens." What happened was spectacular failure. The engine started smoothly and ran perfectly for exactly 28 seconds, developing the kind of power output that Fairfax Industries had promised. Then, just as Rebecca had described, efficiency dropped precipitously. The engine didn't stall or malfunction. It simply stopped producing the performance levels that its design specifications suggested should be achievable. Carl stared at his diagnostic screens in disbelief, watching perfectly normal readings that corresponded to dramatically abnormal performance. "This is impossible. Everything looks right, but the engine's producing 40% less power than it should." "That'll be $5,000, came Victor Fairfax's voice from the garage entrance. The billionaire had arrived just in time to witness Carl's defeat, his timing too perfect to be coincidental. He'd probably been monitoring the situation from his suite at the Stone Creek Inn, waiting for the optimal moment to collect his penalty and demonstrate the futility of challenging his expertise. Carl's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "This engine has a fundamental design flaw. No mechanic could fix what's wrong with it because the problem is in the engineering, not the implementation." "Interesting theory," Fairfax replied coolly, "but the terms of our agreement didn't include exceptions for design flaws. You attempted to solve the problem and failed. Payment is due immediately." The crowd watched in uncomfortable silence as Carl wrote a check for $5,000, his hands shaking slightly with suppressed rage. The confident professional who'd arrived that morning left as a humbled man who'd just learned that expertise had limits, and overconfidence carried expensive consequences. After Carl's departure, the garage felt subdued. Word of his failure spread quickly through Stone Creek's gossip network, carrying with it the sobering realization that Fairfax's challenge might be genuinely impossible. If a professional racing mechanic with computerized diagnostic equipment couldn't solve the problem, what chance did small-town mechanics have? That was rough to watch, Jake said quietly. Carl's no fool, whatever his personality problems. If he couldn't figure it out, then maybe nobody can, Bobby finished, his earlier enthusiasm notably dampened. Marcus remained silent, his mind replaying every detail of Carl's diagnostic process. The Denver mechanic had done everything right according to conventional troubleshooting methodology, but conventional methods weren't designed for the kind of subtle integration problems that advanced hybrid systems could develop. That afternoon brought Alessandro Moretti, a European specialist in luxury automotive systems who'd driven up from Colorado Springs specifically to attempt Fairfax's challenge. Alessandro possessed the kind of refined technical knowledge that came from working exclusively with high-end manufacturers. His expertise focused on the subtle engineering details that separated exceptional vehicles from merely expensive ones. Unlike Carl's brash confidence, Alessandro approached the hybrid engine with careful respect, spending the first hour simply observing and understanding before attempting any diagnostic procedures. His questions were intelligent and specific, revealing deep knowledge of both mechanical and electrical engineering principles. "This is beautiful work," he admitted to Marcus while examining the engine's control systems. "Whoever designed the integration protocols understood both combustion dynamics and electric motor characteristics at a very sophisticated level. You think you can fix it?" Alessandro's expression was thoughtful rather than confident. "Perhaps. The symptoms suggest harmonic interference between power sources, but identifying the specific frequencies involved will require very precise analysis." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Alessandro was the first challenger to identify the correct category of problem, even if he might not possess the tools necessary to solve it completely. The Italian mechanic's approach was methodical and scientific, using specialized equipment that Carl's racing-focused tools had lacked. He measured frequency responses, analyzed power coupling characteristics, and mapped the relationships between various engine components with mathematical precision. "There," Alessandro said after 3 hours of careful work. "I can see the interference. A pattern now. The electric motor cycles are creating resonance frequencies that interfere with combustion timing at specific power levels." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that they might be witnessing a breakthrough. Alessandro's analysis had progressed further than Carl's, identifying not just symptoms, but potential causes. "Can you fix it?" Tommy asked. "I believe so. The solution requires recalibrating the electric motor control algorithms to avoid the problematic frequency ranges. It's delicate work, but theoretically straightforward." Alessandro spent another hour making precise adjustments to the engine's control systems, his movements confident and purposeful. When he finally started the engine for testing, the crowd held its collective breath. The initial results were promising. The engine ran smoothly and produced excellent power output for almost a full minute before the familiar efficiency drop occurred. Alessandro had improved the performance window, but he hadn't eliminated the fundamental problem. "Better," Fairfax acknowledged grudgingly, "but not solved. The performance degradation is delayed but not prevented." Alessandro's face reflected professional disappointment rather than the anger that had consumed Carl. "I identified the correct mechanism, but the solution is more complex than I anticipated. The resonance patterns exist at multiple frequency levels, requiring simultaneous adjustments that I cannot achieve with available equipment. He paid his $5,000 penalty with dignified resignation, acknowledging Fairfax's technical superiority while maintaining his professional pride. As he prepared to leave, Alessandro approached Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "You have been very quiet during both attempts today. For a man who works with engines professionally, you ask remarkably few questions." The observation was accurate and potentially dangerous. Marcus had indeed remained silent, not wanting to reveal his understanding of the problems that had defeated both challenges. "Not much point in asking questions I can't understand the answers to," Marcus replied carefully. Alessandro studied him for a moment longer. "Perhaps, but I have the impression that you understand more than you choose to reveal." After the Italian's departure, Marcus found himself alone in the garage with Fairfax's hybrid engine. The silence felt heavy with possibility and threat, the mechanical challenge representing everything he'd tried to leave behind and everything he might need to reclaim. Tommy emerged from the office carrying a stack of bills that had arrived in the afternoon mail. His expression was grim as he sorted through invoices from suppliers, utility companies, and the bank that held their business loan. "How bad?" Marcus asked. "Bad enough. We're 3 weeks behind on the electric bill, 2 months behind on the shop insurance, and the bank's starting to make noises about calling in our equipment loan." Tommy set the bills on his workbench with the resignation of a man who'd fought similar battles many times before. Kyle's failure today isn't going to encourage other mechanics to try. People are starting to think this challenge is rigged. Maybe it is. You think Fairfax designed an unsolvable problem just to collect penalty payments? Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think he designed a problem that requires specific knowledge to solve. Knowledge that most mechanics wouldn't have access to, but you would. It wasn't a question." Tommy had listened to both failed attempts with the sharp ear of someone who'd spent decades diagnosing mechanical problems. He'd heard Alessandro identify the correct theoretical framework and watched Marcus's carefully neutral expression during the Italian's sophisticated analysis. Probably. Then what are we waiting for? The question hung between them like a challenge. Marcus knew that accepting Fairfax's terms would mean revealing expertise that would inevitably lead to questions about his past, questions that could destroy the quiet life he'd built for Isabella. But he also knew that their financial situation was becoming desperate, that his daughter needed medical treatment he couldn't afford, and that their current path led inevitably toward losing everything they'd worked to protect. "I need to think about it," Marcus said finally. "Don't think too long," Tommy replied quietly. "Sometimes opportunities don't wait for us to get comfortable with them." That evening, Marcus sat on his front porch watching Isabella play with the neighbor's cat, her laughter carrying across the quiet street like a promise of the childhood he'd tried to give her. Tomorrow would bring another day of impossible choices, another step closer to the moment when he'd have to decide whether protecting his secrets was worth more than securing his daughter's future. Wednesday morning arrived with the weight of finality. Victor Fairfax had given the town 3 days to consider his challenge, and tomorrow he would demand a final answer from anyone bold enough to risk $5,000 on an impossible puzzle. Marcus arrived at Stewart's Auto Repair to find the garage door already open and the lights on, despite being 30 minutes early for work. Tommy sat at his desk, surrounded by ledgers and calculator tape, his weathered face etched with the kind of exhaustion that came from wrestling with numbers that refused to add up properly. Empty coffee cups littered the workspace, evidence of a sleepless night spent confronting financial reality. "Morning," Marcus said quietly, not wanting to startle his boss from whatever calculations consumed his attention. "Morning, son. Coffee's fresh if you want some." Marcus poured himself a cup and settled into the folding chair beside Tommy's desk. "How bad is it?" Tommy leaned back with a sigh that seemed to echo from his bones. "Worse than I let on yesterday. Bank called at home last night. They want a meeting Friday morning to discuss restructuring our loan or beginning foreclosure proceedings on the shop." Foreclosure? Equipment, tools, building lease, everything. They've been patient because we've been customers for 20 years. But patience doesn't pay their bills either. Tommy gestured toward the scattered paperwork. "I've been looking at our options all night. Bankruptcy would let us keep some personal assets, but the shop would be finished." Marcus stared into his coffee, watching steam rise from the dark surface. What about selling to Peterson's garage? Consolidate the two shops under one owner? Jim Peterson made an offer last month. Enough to cover the debts and give me a small retirement fund. Nothing more. All the employees would lose their jobs. Of course, can't support two full crews from one location. The implications settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. Losing the garage would mean unemployment in a town with few automotive repair options. Jake Rogers, Tony Ramirez, and Bobby Miller would all need to find work elsewhere, probably in Denver or Colorado Springs. The ripple effects would touch every family connected to Stewart's Auto Repair. "There's another option," Tommy said carefully, "one that could solve everyone's problems if it works." Marcus knew what was coming, had been expecting this conversation since Alessandro's failed attempt the previous afternoon. Fairfax's challenge. $50,000 would clear our debts, give us operating capital for 6 months, and cover your daughter's medical expenses for a year. It's more money than this shop has seen at one time in its entire history. And if I fail, then we're 5,000 deeper in debt, but we were headed for bankruptcy anyway. Sometimes you have to risk everything to save anything. The logic was sound, but terrifying. Marcus had spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of high-stakes gamble, building a life based on steady work and careful anonymity. Now circumstance was forcing him to choose between maintaining his protective obscurity and embracing the expertise that could save everyone he cared about in Stone Creek. The garage door chimed as Jake Rogers arrived, his expression grim with the weight of his own financial concerns. "Morning, guys. Any word on whether anyone else is planning to try Fairfax's challenge?" "It doesn't look like it," Tommy replied. "Word's gotten around about Carl and Alessandro's failures. Most people think the challenge is impossible or rigged." "Maybe it is," Jake said, settling onto a workbench with his usual coffee. $5,000. Penalty for failing to solve what professional engineers couldn't figure out. Seems like a pretty good racket if you're in the business of collecting money from desperate people. Marcus considered this perspective. Fairfax's challenge could indeed be an elaborate confidence scheme, designed to extract penalty payments from mechanics who overestimated their abilities. But the engine itself was real, as were the technical problems that had stumped multiple consulting firms. The challenge might be nearly impossible, but it wasn't fraudulent. "They've been thinking about trying it," Marcus said suddenly, the words emerging before he could reconsider them. Both men turned to stare at him with expressions of surprise and concern. Jake set down his coffee cup with exaggerated care, as if sudden movements might shatter the fragile confidence required for such a decision. "Marcus," Tommy said slowly, "I appreciate the thought, but 5,000 is more than you make in 3 months. You can't afford to lose that kind of money." "I can't afford not to try. Isabella needs that new medication. We're facing foreclosure on the house, and if the shop closes, I'll be unemployed anyway." Jake frowned with the protective concern of genuine friendship. "But what makes you think you can succeed where professional racing mechanics and luxury car specialists failed?" The question required an answer that Marcus wasn't prepared to give completely. Explaining his confidence would mean revealing his aerospace engineering background, which would inevitably lead to questions about why he'd abandoned such a lucrative career for small-town automotive repair. "I've been studying the engine since Monday," he said carefully. "I think I understand what the other mechanics missed." What did they miss? Marcus hesitated, knowing that any detailed technical explanation would reveal knowledge that contradicted his carefully constructed background as a general automotive mechanic. But Jake and Tommy deserved some explanation for his sudden confidence. The problem isn't mechanical in the traditional sense. It's about timing relationships between the electric and combustion systems. Both Carl and Alessandro identified parts of the issue, but they were looking at symptoms rather than causes. Tommy leaned forward with interest. "What kind of timing relationships?" "Complex ones. The kind that require understanding both electrical engineering and combustion dynamics at a level that most mechanics never encounter." The explanation was truthful without being complete, revealing Marcus's theoretical knowledge while avoiding specifics about how he'd acquired such expertise. Both men absorbed this information with the thoughtful expressions of people trying to assess whether confidence was justified or delusional. "You really think you can fix it?" Jake asked. "I think I have a better chance than anyone who's tried so far." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Carmen Green, carrying a thermal carafe of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd been elected to deliver difficult news. She nodded to the three men before settling into Tommy's office chair with the comfortable authority of someone who'd known them all for years. "Boys, we need to talk about what's happening in this town. Victor Fairfax's little game is tearing people apart." "How so?" Tommy asked. "Peterson's garage is actively discouraging anyone from trying the challenge, claiming it's all a scam designed to fleece hard-working mechanics. Half the town thinks Fairfax is a con artist. The other half thinks he's some kind of genius who's testing our worthiness." Carmen poured fresh coffee for everyone, her movements carrying the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to managing difficult conversations over shared meals. "There's more. Lisa Coleman at the bank mentioned that several families are considering taking out loans against their homes to raise the $5,000 entry fee. People are getting desperate, talking about pooling resources to fund multiple attempts." Marcus felt his stomach tighten at the implications. Fairfax's challenge was creating exactly the kind of community division that he'd hoped to avoid by maintaining his anonymity. Desperate people were making increasingly dangerous financial decisions based on the slim hope that someone local could succeed where professionals had failed. "It gets worse," Carmen continued. "Rebecca Fairfax came by the diner this morning, asking more questions about you, Marcus. Wanted to know about your background, your training, why you moved to Stone Creek." "What did you tell her?" "Same thing I told her father, that you're a good man who works hard and keeps to himself. But she's not asking casual questions. She suspects you know more about engines than you've let on." The observation confirmed Marcus's growing certainty that his technical knowledge was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. Rebecca Fairfax possessed the engineering background necessary to recognize advanced expertise when she encountered it, and his comments about harmonic resonance had clearly raised her suspicions. "There's something else," Carmen said, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. "I heard from Dr. Reed's office that Isabella's been having more difficulty with her breathing this week. They want to see her again tomorrow." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of parental concern that never fully disappeared when your child lived with a chronic medical condition. Isabella's asthma had been well controlled for months, but stress and seasonal changes could trigger flare-ups that required immediate medical attention. "She's been trying to hide it from me," he admitted. "Doesn't want me to worry about medical bills on top of everything else." "That child has more sense than most adults," Carmen said gently. "But she needs proper care, not good intentions." Reality of Isabella's condition crystallized Marcus's decision. His daughter's health couldn't wait for careful consideration of long-term consequences. If she needed expensive medication and advanced treatment, he had to find a way to provide it, regardless of the personal costs. "I'm going to accept Fairfax's challenge," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the finality of a man who'd stopped weighing options and started choosing actions. Tommy nodded slowly, his expression mixing concern with approval. "What do you need? From us? Time to work on the engine without interruption, and maybe some assistance with diagnostic equipment that I don't have personal access to." Jake straightened with the eagerness of someone offered a chance to contribute meaningfully to a dangerous enterprise. "What kind of assistance?" "The kind that might require bending a few rules about who's officially attempting the challenge." Both men grinned at the implication. Fairfax's terms specified that only one person could officially attempt the repair, but they said nothing about consultation or advice from colleagues. If Marcus needed additional hands or expertise, his friends would find ways to provide them without technically violating the agreement. Carmen stood to leave, her mission accomplished and her confidence in Marcus's decision evident in her supportive expression. "I'll make sure word gets around town that you're planning to try. Might help calm some of the panic about pooling money for multiple attempts." After she left, the three men sat in comfortable silence, each contemplating the magnitude of what they'd agreed to undertake. Marcus felt the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that accompanied major decisions, the recognition that he was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "When do you want to start?" Tommy asked. "This afternoon. I need to examine the engine more carefully than I could with crowds watching, and I need to make some calculations that require privacy." "What kind of calculations?" Marcus smiled for the first time in days. "The kind that might remind me why I used to be good at solving impossible problems." That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with Isabella, helping her with homework while his mind wrestled with harmonic frequency equations and power coupling algorithms. The familiar routine of checking math problems and reviewing spelling. Words provided a comforting counterpoint to the technical challenges that awaited him tomorrow. "Dad, are you really going to try to fix that special engine?" Isabella asked, her question carrying both pride and concern. "I'm going to try, sweetheart, but it's very complicated and I might not succeed, but you will," she said with the absolute confidence that children reserve for their parents. "You always fix things that other people can't." Her faith was both inspiring and terrifying. Marcus had spent 3 years being worthy of that trust in small ways, repairing lawnmowers and pickup trucks with the patient competence that his daughter had learned to depend on. Tomorrow would reveal whether that competence extended to challenges that had defeated some of the most skilled mechanics in the country. As he tucked Isabella into bed that night, she surprised him with a question that revealed how much she'd been thinking about their situation. "If you fix the engine and we get the money, will we be able to stay in Stone Creek?" "Yes, sweetheart, we'll be able to stay." "Good. I like it here. I like my school and my friends and Mr. Stewart's garage. I like it here too. And Mom would want us to be somewhere we're happy, right?" The question caught Marcus off guard with its mature understanding of loss and continuity. Isabella had been too young when Rachel died to fully comprehend the tragedy, but she was old enough now to understand that her mother's wishes continued to influence their family decisions. "Yes," Marcus said softly. "Mom would want us to be happy and safe and together. Then you should fix the engine, not just for the money, but because it's the right thing to do." As Marcus turned off Isabella's bedroom light and closed her door, he marveled at his daughter's ability to distill complex situations into simple moral imperatives. Tomorrow's challenge wasn't just about solving technical problems or securing financial stability. It was about honoring the memory of the woman who'd taught him that expertise without compassion was meaningless, and that the most important problems were always human ones disguised as technical challenges. Thursday morning brought crystalline mountain air and the kind of clarity that comes with irrevocable decisions. Marcus arrived at Stewart's auto repair before dawn, carrying a thermos of coffee and a notebook filled with calculations he'd worked on until 2 in the morning. The garage stood silent and empty, its familiar shadows transformed by the gravity of what awaited him. He unlocked the overhead doors and wheeled Fairfax's hybrid engine into the center bay, positioning it under the brightest work lights available. For the first time since its arrival, Marcus could examine the system without curious onlookers or time pressure, free to apply the analytical methods he'd learned during his aerospace engineering career. The engine was more sophisticated than even Alessandro had realized. What appeared to be a straightforward hybrid integration actually incorporated design elements that Marcus recognized from his own research with Rachel years earlier. Power distribution algorithms that they'd theorized but never implemented. Harmonic dampening systems based on equations Rachel had developed shortly before her death. Someone had taken their foundational work and refined it into practical reality. Marcus opened his notebook to pages covered with frequency calculations and timing diagrams, mathematical representations of the relationships he suspected were causing the performance degradation. If his analysis was correct, the engine's problems stemmed from a design choice that prioritized theoretical elegance over real-world stability. The bell above the garage door chimed softly as Tommy entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee and moving, with the quiet respect appropriate to observing a master craftsman at work. "Morning," Tommy said, setting 1 cup within Marcus's reach. "How's it looking?" "Complex, but solvable, I think." Marcus gestured toward the engine's control modules. The previous mechanics were right about harmonic interference, but they were looking at secondary effects rather than primary causes. Meaning the real problem is buried deeper in the system architecture. It's not just about frequency, conflicts between electric and combustion components. It's about how the control algorithms attempt to resolve those conflicts. Tommy absorbed this explanation with the patient attention of someone who'd learned to trust Marcus's technical judgment. Over 3 years of successful problem solving. What do you need to fix it? Time, mostly, and access to the engine's programming interface. Marcus indicated a sealed panel near the base of the hybrid assembly. The software that manages power distribution can be modified, but it requires specialized equipment that most mechanics wouldn't have. "Do we have what you need?" Marcus smiled, reaching into his toolbox to retrieve a device that looked more like a laptop computer than traditional automotive equipment. "I brought some tools from my previous life. Been carrying them around for 3 years, never thinking I'd need them again." The programming interface was a compact unit that could connect to various types of electronic control systems, allowing direct modification of software parameters. Marcus had originally purchased it for aerospace applications, but the underlying technology was adaptable to automotive systems with the right expertise. "That's some fancy equipment for a small-town mechanic," Tommy observed with gentle curiosity. "Rachel and I bought it for a project we were working on before she died. It's been sitting in a closet ever since. Too expensive to sell and too painful to look at." Marcus connected the interface to the engine's control systems, watching as streams of code appeared on the device's screen. The programming language was familiar, even after 3 years away from advanced engineering work. Some skills, once mastered, never truly disappeared. "There," he said, pointing to a section of code that governed timing relationships between engine components. "That's the source of the problem." Tommy leaned closer, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible symbols and numbers. What am I looking at? A feedback loop that's too aggressive. The control system detects minor performance variations and tries to compensate by adjusting power distribution. But the corrections create new variations, which trigger additional corrections, until the whole system becomes unstable, like overcorrecting when you're driving on ice. Exactly. The engine works perfectly until it encounters the kind of load variations that occur in real-world applications. Then, the control system starts chasing its own tail. Marcus began modifying the code, his fingers moving with the confident precision of someone returning to familiar territory. Each change was deliberate and calculated, based on mathematical relationships he'd memorized years earlier during his work with Rachel. The garage door opened again as Jake Rogers arrived, followed by Bobby Miller and Tony Ramirez. All three men moved quietly, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in their experience with automotive repair. "Holy hell," Bobby whispered, staring at the programming interface. "You're rewriting the engine's software." "Modifying it," Marcus corrected. "The basic architecture is sound, but some of the parameters need adjustment." Jake studied the screen with fascination and bewilderment. "Where did you learn to do this kind of work?" The question had been inevitable, but Marcus still wasn't prepared with a complete answer. "My wife and I worked on similar systems years ago. Different applications, but the principles are the same." "What kind of applications?" Before Marcus could respond, the garage door announced another arrival. Rebecca Fairfax entered, followed by her father and two men Marcus didn't recognize. Victor Fairfax moved with the confident stride of someone arriving to collect a debt, but his daughter's expression suggested genuine curiosity about Marcus's approach to the challenge. "Mr. Brown," Fairfax said, his voice carrying amused condescension. "I understand you've decided to attempt our little puzzle. How refreshing to see such optimism in the face of overwhelming odds." "Mr. Fairfax," Marcus replied without looking up from his work. "You're welcome to observe, but I'd prefer not to. Be distracted by conversation during the critical phases." Fairfax's eyebrows rose at the polite dismissal. He'd probably expected deference from a small-town mechanic, not the professional focus that Marcus was displaying. Rebecca approached the workstation with obvious interest in the programming interface. "That's sophisticated equipment for automotive repair work. Most mechanics rely on standardized diagnostic tools. Most automotive problems don't require software modification," Marcus replied, continuing his careful adjustments to the control algorithms. "But this one does. This one requires understanding the mathematical relationships that govern hybrid power integration. Hardware diagnostics can identify symptoms, but solving the underlying problem requires changing how the system processes information." Rebecca's expression sharpened with recognition. "You're talking about control theory applications to multi-source power systems. That's graduate-level engineering mathematics." Marcus finally looked up from his work, meeting her intelligent gaze directly. "Yes, it is." The simple acknowledgement hung between them like a revelation. Rebecca possessed sufficient technical background to recognize advanced expertise when she encountered it, and Marcus had stopped pretending to be anything less than what he was. "Where did you study control theory?" she asked quietly. "MIT. Aerospace engineering program, specializing in propulsion systems integration." Victor Fairfax's confident expression faltered slightly. "MIT? You're claiming to be an MIT-trained engineer working as a mechanic in a small Colorado town?" "I'm not claiming anything. I'm stating facts." The two men who'd accompanied the Fairfaxes stepped forward with the alert posture of people prepared for trouble. Marcus recognized the type: corporate security, trained to handle situations where business negotiations became confrontational. "Dad," Rebecca said quietly, Let him work. If he's really MIT trained, he might actually solve this. And if he's lying about his credentials? Marcus saved his work on the programming interface and straightened to face Victor Fairfax directly. Then I'll pay your $5,000 penalty, and you can leave town with another trophy for your collection. But if I'm telling the truth, you'll owe me $50,000 and an apology to everyone in Stone Creek. The challenge was issued calmly, but unmistakably. Marcus had stopped playing the role of deferential small-town mechanic and embraced the confident expertise that had once made him one of the most respected engineers in his field. Fairfax studied him with new attention, reassessing the man he dismissed as beneath serious consideration. "Very well, Mr. Brown. Complete your modifications and we'll test your solution. But I warn you, this engine has defeated some of the finest technical minds in the country." "I know. I've been studying their approaches for 3 days. They were all competent professionals who made the same fundamental error, which was they assumed the problem was mechanical when it's actually mathematical. They tried to fix hardware when the issue was software. They looked for engineering solutions when they needed theoretical analysis." Marcus returned to his programming work, aware that every person in the garage was now watching his every movement with intense concentration. The modifications he was making required precise calculation of frequency relationships and timing. Parameters, work that drew on knowledge, accumulated over years of advanced study and practical application. "There," he said finally, saving the final changes and disconnecting the programming interface. "The control algorithms have been adjusted to eliminate the feedback instabilities that were causing performance degradation." Tommy checked his watch nervously. "How long did that take?" "About 90 minutes for the software modifications, but I spent most of last night calculating the correct parameters." Victor Fairfax approached the engine with obvious skepticism. "You're claiming to have solved in one morning what 3 consulting firms couldn't resolve in weeks of analysis." "I'm claiming to have identified and corrected a specific software problem that those firms weren't equipped to address. They were automotive specialists trying to solve an aerospace engineering problem." Rebecca studied the modified code on Marcus's programming interface, her expression growing increasingly amazed as she recognized the sophistication of his work. "These calculations are based on Rachel Martinez Brown's theoretical work on hybrid propulsion systems." The use of Rachel's full professional name hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd expected that connection to be discovered eventually, but hearing his wife's research credited directly was both painful and validating. "You knew Rachel's work?" he asked quietly. "She was a legend in hybrid propulsion theory. Her papers on power distribution networks laid the foundation for most current research in the field." Rebecca's voice carried genuine respect. "Are you her husband, the Marcus Brown, who co-authored her later publications?" The question revealed the depth of Rebecca's technical knowledge and her familiarity with advanced engineering literature. Marcus had tried to maintain anonymity, but his expertise had inevitably connected him to his previous professional identity. "Yes," he said simply. Victor Fairfax's expression underwent a dramatic transformation as he processed this revelation. "You're Dr. Marcus Brown, formerly of Aerospace Dynamics Corporation, the propulsion systems engineer who disappeared after the intellectual property scandal." "I didn't disappear. I chose to leave a profession that valued corporate politics over technical excellence." "And you've been hiding in this garage for 3 years?" "I've been raising my daughter in a community that values honest work over academic credentials." The conversation was interrupted by Sheriff Dan Hayes entering the garage, followed by several townspeople who'd heard that Marcus was attempting Fairfax's challenge. Word had spread quickly through Stone Creek's gossip network, bringing an audience to witness what might be the most significant technical achievement in the town's history. Carmen Green positioned herself near the front of the gathering crowd. her expression mixing pride and concern as she watched Marcus prepare for the final test of his modifications. "Are you ready to start the engine?" Tommy asked. Marcus nodded, his hand moving to the ignition controls with the steady confidence of someone who'd calculated every variable and prepared for every possibility. 3 years of hiding his expertise were about to end, one way or another. Teat engine started smoothly, its initial performance confirming that Marcus's modifications hadn't disrupted basic functionality. But the real test would come under load, when the power distribution systems encountered the stress conditions that had defeated every previous attempt. 30 seconds, Rebecca announced, watching the performance monitors with growing excitement. Power output is stable and within design specifications. The crowd held its collective breath as the test continued past the point where previous attempts had failed. 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 full minutes of sustained maximum performance, without the efficiency degradation that had stumped 3 major engineering firms. "Impossible," Victor Fairfax whispered, his face pale with shock. "Not impossible," Marcus replied calmly, "just improbable, unless you understand the theoretical foundation that your engineers were trying to implement." As the engine continued, running flawlessly, producing the power output that Fairfax Industries had promised but never achieved, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. He'd not only solved an impossible technical problem, but honored Rachel's memory by demonstrating the practical value of her theoretical work. The quiet mechanic who'd spent 3 years hiding in Stone Creek had reclaimed his identity as one of the most gifted engineers of his generation, and in doing so, he'd secured not only his family's financial future, but his own sense of professional worth. The engine had been running flawlessly for 15 minutes when Victor Fairfax finally conceded defeat. His face had progressed through disbelief, anger, and resignation before settling into the grudging respect that successful people reserve for those who exceed their expectations. The crowd in Stewart's auto repair had grown to nearly 30 people, word having spread through Stone Creek like wildfire that something extraordinary was happening at the garage. "Shut it down," Fairfax said quietly, his voice barely audible over the engine's smooth operation. Marcus reached for the ignition control, ending the demonstration that had vindicated 3 years of hidden expertise. The sudden silence felt profound, after the sustained rumble of the hybrid system, leaving only the whispered conversations of amazed onlookers and the distant sounds of normal life continuing outside the garage. "Well?" Tommy asked, though the answer was obvious to everyone present. Fairfax straightened his expensive suit jacket and walked to where Marcus stood beside the now silent engine. His pale blue eyes held none of their earlier condescension, replaced by the calculating respect that one professional accords another. "Dr. Brown," he said formally, "you have successfully resolved the performance issues that have plagued this engine for 8 months. The solution is elegant, theoretically sound, and practically effective." A cheer went up from the assembled townspeople. But Marcus remained focused on Fairfax's face, reading the complex emotions that crossed the billionaire's features. Victory was sweet, but something in Fairfax's expression suggested that winning the challenge might create complications that Marcus hadn't anticipated. "The $50,000 will be transferred to your account by close of business today," Fairfax continued. "You have my word as a businessman and my respect as a fellow engineer." Rebecca Fairfax stepped forward, her expression mixing professional admiration with personal curiosity. "Dr. Brown, what you've accomplished here goes beyond solving our technical problem. You've demonstrated that some of the most advanced theoretical work in propulsion systems can be implemented by someone working alone with basic equipment." "Not alone," Marcus corrected, gesturing toward Tommy, Jake, and the others who'd supported his effort. "And not basic equipment. I couldn't have done this without people who believed in me and access to tools that most mechanics don't possess. Sheriff Dan Hayes moved through the crowd to shake Marcus's hand, his weathered face creased with genuine pride. Son, I've lived in Stone Creek for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished. The whole town's going to be talking about this for decades. Carmen Green approached with tears in her eyes, her maternal pride evident as she embraced Marcus warmly. Rachel would be so proud of you, not just for solving the problem, but for the man you've become. While raising Isabella, the mention of his daughter reminded Marcus that Isabella was still at school, unaware that her father had just secured their financial future and reclaimed his professional identity. He wondered how to explain to a 10-year-old that they're quiet. Life in Stone Creek was about to become considerably more complicated. Victor Fairfax had been conferring quietly with his security personnel, but now he returned to address Marcus directly. Dr. Brown, I have a proposition that might interest you. Fairfax Industries is always seeking talented engineers for our advanced development projects. Your demonstrated expertise with hybrid systems would be valuable to our research division. The job offer caught Marcus off guard, though he probably should have expected it. Corporate executives like Fairfax didn't encounter genius-level problem-solving without attempting to acquire it for their own purposes. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Fairfax, but I'm not interested in returning to corporate engineering. The compensation would be substantial. Base salary in the mid-six figures, plus performance bonuses and stock options. You'd have access to unlimited research budgets and the most advanced facilities in the industry. Tommy shifted uncomfortably beside Marcus, recognizing the magnitude of what was being offered and the threat it represented to their small-town garage. $50,000 had seemed like a fortune, but Fairfax was now discussing annual salaries that exceeded what Stewart's Auto Repair grossed in multiple years. My answer remains the same, Marcus said firmly. I chose this life deliberately, and today's success doesn't change that choice. Fairfax's expression suggested that he wasn't accustomed to having generous offers rejected, but he nodded with professional courtesy. Very well. But if you reconsider, my offer stands indefinitely. He gestured to his security team, who began the process of preparing the hybrid engine for transport back to its custom trailer, the mechanical puzzle that had dominated Stone Creek's attention for 4 days would be gone by evening, leaving only memories and the knowledge that one of their own had accomplished something remarkable. Dad, Rebecca said quietly, there's something else we need to discuss. Victor turned to his daughter with raised eyebrows. Which is? The intellectual property implications of Dr. Brown's solution. His modifications are based on research that predates our development program. If we implement his changes in our production systems, we need to ensure proper attribution and compensation. Marcus looked up sharply from disconnecting his programming equipment. What kind of intellectual property implications? Rebecca's expression was apologetic but determined. Your solution incorporates theoretical work that you and Rachel developed years ago. If we use your modifications to resolve our production problems, we're essentially implementing your intellectual property in our commercial systems. Which means you're entitled to licensing fees for any engines that use your solution, potentially substantial licensing fees, depending on our production volumes. Victor Fairfax's face darkened with understanding. He'd come to Stone Creek, expecting to collect penalty fees from overconfident mechanics. Instead, he was facing the possibility of paying ongoing royalties to a man he'd initially dismissed as beneath his consideration. Tommy whistled softly. How substantial are we talking about? Rebecca consulted a tablet that she'd been using to document the day's events. Our projected production volume for the next 5 years would generate approximately $2 million in licensing revenue. assuming standard industry royalty rates. The figure stunned everyone within hearing distance. Marcus felt his knees weaken as the full implications of Rebecca's statement registered. Not only had he won Fairfax's $50,000 challenge, but he'd potentially secured millions in additional income from intellectual property rights. "That can't be correct," Marcus said weakly. "I'm afraid it is," Rebecca replied. "Your wife's theoretical work forms the foundation of our entire hybrid development program, and your practical implementation today proved that her theories can be successfully commercialized. You hold legitimate intellectual property claims that we're legally obligated to respect." Victor Fairfax looked like a man who'd discovered that what he'd thought was a profitable venture had turned into a catastrophic financial liability. "Rebecca, surely there are ways to modify our systems to avoid these intellectual property issues. Not without starting our development program from scratch, which would cost far more than the licensing fees." Dr. Brown's solution is not only correct, it's probably the only practical way to resolve our production problems. Jake Rogers had been listening to this conversation with growing amazement. "Marcus, are you understanding what she's saying? You're not just getting $50,000, you're getting millions." The weight of sudden wealth was almost overwhelming. Marcus had spent 3 years worrying about mortgage payments and medical bills, carefully budgeting every purchase and deferring every luxury. Now he was facing financial security beyond anything he'd imagined possible. "I need some air," he said, stepping outside into the cool mountain afternoon. The street outside Stewart's Auto Repair looked exactly as it had that morning, but Marcus's perception of everything had changed fundamentally. He was no longer a struggling single father hiding from his past. He was Dr. Marcus Brown, aerospace engineer, problem solver, and apparently millionaire. Tommy followed him outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the perpetual pot that Carmen had been maintaining throughout the day's events. "You okay, son?" "I'm not sure. This morning I was worried about paying Isabella's medical bills. Tonight I'm apparently wealthy enough to buy the entire block." Tommy sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Money's just a tool, Marcus. What matters is what you do with it." "What if I don't know what to do with it? I've spent so long focused on survival that I never considered what success might actually look like." "Then you figure it out one day. At a time, same as you've been doing with everything else." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the familiar rhythms of Stone Creek's daily life continue around them. Mrs. Dorothy Walsh walked her small dog past the garage, nodding pleasantly. As if nothing extraordinary had occurred, a delivery truck rumbled past on its way to the lumber mill. Children's voices carried from the playground at Mountain View Elementary, where Isabella was finishing her school day, unaware that her father had just transformed their lives. "Tommy," Marcus said finally, "I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us. I still want to work here, still want to be part of what you've built." Tommy smiled, his weathered face reflecting both relief and amusement. "Son, you just became independently wealthy. You don't need to work anywhere." "Maybe not, but I want to. This place, these people, they're my family now. Money doesn't change that." "What about Isabella? She's going to need time to adjust to all this attention." Marcus nodded, recognizing the challenge ahead. "We'll figure it out together. Maybe use some of the money to make improvements around town, help other families who are facing the same struggles we were." That sounds like something Rachel would have suggested. She always said that individual success didn't mean much unless it contributed to community well-being. I think she'd approve of using her theoretical work to benefit Stone Creek. Inside the garage, the crowd was beginning to disperse as word spread that the immediate excitement was over. Victor Fairfax had signed the necessary paperwork to transfer the $50,000 prize, while Rebecca worked on documenting the intellectual property agreements that would govern future licensing arrangements. Bobby Miller approached Marcus, As he returned to the garage, his young face shining with excitement and admiration. "Mr. Brown, what you did today was incredible. I mean, I always knew you were good with engines, but this was like watching a magician. Not magic, Bobby. Just mathematics applied to mechanical problems. The same principles you're learning, just at a more advanced level. Could you teach me? I mean, not the MIT stuff, but some of the diagnostic techniques you used?" Marcus smiled, recognizing in Bobby's eagerness the same passion for learning that had driven his own career development. "I'd be happy to. In fact, I'm thinking about establishing a technical training program here in Stone Creek, something that could help local mechanics develop more advanced skills." Tommy's eyebrows rose with interest. "A training program? Why not? We've got the space, the equipment, and now the funding. Plus, there are probably other young mechanics in the region who could benefit from access to advanced automotive education." The idea was taking shape as Marcus spoke, driven by his recognition that knowledge shared was knowledge multiplied. He'd spent 3 years working in isolation, but today's success had reminded him of the satisfaction that came from pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Carmen Green rejoined their conversation, her expression thoughtful. "A training program would be wonderful for the community. Give young people reasons to stay instead of leaving for the cities." "It would also honor Rachel's memory," Marcus added quietly. "She always believed that advanced technical knowledge should be accessible to anyone willing to work hard enough to master it." As the afternoon sun began casting longer shadows across Main Street, Marcus reflected on the day's extraordinary developments. He'd awakened as a struggling mechanic facing financial ruin and was ending the day as a recognized expert with more money than he'd ever imagined possible. But the most important transformation wasn't financial. For the first time since Rachel's death, Marcus felt truly aligned with his authentic self. The brilliant engineer and the devoted father were no longer separate identities that he struggled to balance. They were integrated aspects of the same person, each reinforcing the other in ways that made him more effective at both roles. Victor Fairfax approached as his team finished loading the repaired engine onto its transport trailer. "Dr. Brown, I owe you an apology. I came to Stone Creek expecting to demonstrate the superiority of corporate resources over small-town ingenuity. Instead, you've shown me that genius can flourish anywhere if it's properly nurtured." "Apology accepted, Mr. Fairfax, and thank you for bringing a challenge that reminded me who I used to be." "Who you still are," Fairfax corrected. "The question now is what you plan to do with that identity." As the Fairfax convoy pulled away from Stewart's auto repair, Marcus stood surrounded by friends and neighbors who'd witnessed his transformation from hidden genius to acknowledged expert. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight he would simply enjoy the satisfaction of a job well done and the security of knowing that Isabella's future was assured. Marcus drove home that evening with his mind spinning from the day's revelations, but his first priority remained unchanged, picking up Isabella from school and maintaining the normal routine that anchored both their lives. As he pulled into the parking lot of Mountain View Elementary, he spotted her sitting on the front steps with her backpack, chatting animatedly with Emma Walsh while they waited for their respective parents. Isabella looked up as he approached, her face lighting with the unconditional joy that children reserve for parents they adore. Nothing in her expression suggested awareness that their lives had fundamentally changed, and Marcus felt grateful for the innocence that protected her from adult concerns about money and social status. "Dad, guess what happened in science class?" "Today," she said, bouncing into the passenger seat with her usual energy. "Mrs. Turner showed us how hybrid cars work, and I got to explain some of it because I remembered what you told me about electric motors and gasoline engines working together." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. What did you tell them?" that it's like having two different kinds of strong people helping push a heavy box. Sometimes one person pushes alone, sometimes they both push together, and sometimes they take turns, so nobody gets too tired. Marcus smiled at the analogy, which captured the essential concept of hybrid operation more clearly than most technical explanations. That's exactly right. You understood it perfectly. Mrs. Turner said I have a good brain for science, just like you do. She wants to know if you'd come talk to our class about engines sometime. The innocent request highlighted one of the challenges Marcus would face in the coming weeks. His expertise was no longer a secret, and people would naturally want to involve him in educational activities that showcased his knowledge. Managing those expectations while protecting Isabella's childhood. Normalcy would require careful balance. We'll see, honey. I might be able to arrange something. As they drove through downtown Stone Creek, Marcus noticed more activity than usual around Carmen's Corner Diner. Cars filled the normally half-empty parking lot, and people clustered in animated conversation outside the entrance. Word of the day's events had clearly spread beyond the immediate witnesses, drawing curious residents who wanted to hear first-hand accounts of their neighbor's extraordinary achievement. "Why are so many people at Carmen's?" Isabella asked, pressing her face to the window. "Just the usual Thursday evening crowd," Marcus replied, though they both knew that Thursday evenings were typically quiet in Stone Creek. At home, Marcus helped Isabella with her homework while wrestling with how to explain the day's developments in terms that a 10-year-old could understand and process. The $50,000 would ensure her medical needs were met and eliminate the financial stress that had shadowed their lives for months. But the potential licensing revenue represented changes that went far beyond simple financial security. "Dad, you seem different tonight," Isabella observed while working on her math problems. "Happy different, like when we found that injured owl last winter and nursed it back to health." The comparison was remarkably perceptive. Marcus had felt the same sense of purposeful accomplishment both times, the satisfaction that came from applying his skills to help something damaged become whole again. "I had a good day at work, sweetheart. Remember that special engine I told you about? I was able to fix it." Isabella's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? The one that other mechanics couldn't fix?" "That's right." It turned out the problem was more complicated than most people realized, but not too complicated for us to solve. Us, Mr. Stewart and Jake and Bobby all helped. And you helped too by being patient while I worked late and studied those technical books. Isabella beamed with pride at being included in the achievement. "So we won the prize money?" "We did. Enough to pay for your new medicine and catch up on all our bills, and maybe get a dog," Marcus laughed, remembering their conversation from earlier in the week. "Maybe. We'll need to find the right place first, somewhere with a yard big enough for a dog to run around." The doorbell interrupted their homework session. Marcus opened it to find Dr. Patricia Reed standing on his front step, carrying her medical bag and wearing the concerned expression that always made his heart race when it involved Isabella's health. "Dr. Reed, is everything okay?" "I thought Isabella's appointment was tomorrow." "It is, but I heard about what happened at the garage today and wanted to check on both of you. Major life changes can be stressful, even positive ones." Marcus invited her in, grateful for the physician's thoughtful attention to the psychological aspects of their situation. Isabella greeted Dr. Reed with the easy familiarity of a patient who'd known her doctor for years, showing off her completed math homework before returning to her remaining assignments. "How are you processing today's events?" Dr. Reed asked quietly, settling into the living room where they could speak without disturbing Isabella. "Honestly, I'm still trying to understand what happened. This morning I was worried about paying bills. Tonight I'm apparently wealthy enough to never work again if I choose, but you're not choosing that." No, wealth without purpose is just expensive boredom. I want to use this opportunity to build something meaningful. Dr. Reed nodded approvingly. What kind of something? Marcus outlined his ideas for the technical training program, explaining how advanced automotive education could benefit young people throughout the region, while honoring Rachel's commitment to accessible learning. As he spoke, the concept gained clarity and specificity, evolving from vague notion to practical possibility. That sounds wonderful, Marcus. Stone Creek could certainly benefit from that kind of educational opportunity. Dr. Reed paused thoughtfully. There's something else we should discuss. Isabella's condition. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that accompanied any conversation about his daughter's health. Is she getting worse? Not worse, but not improving as much as I'd hoped. The new medication protocol we discussed would still be beneficial, but now that cost isn't a constraint, we have additional options. What kind of options? Specialist consultation in Denver. There's a pediatric pulmonologist who's had excellent results with advanced treatment protocols for childhood asthma. It would involve regular trips to the city, but the potential for long-term improvement is significant. Marcus looked toward the kitchen where Isabella was working diligently on her homework, unaware that adults were discussing her medical future. The possibility of genuine improvement in her condition, rather than simply managing symptoms, was worth any amount of money or inconvenience. Set up the consultation, whatever she needs. After Dr. Reed left, Marcus found Isabella reading in her bedroom, surrounded by the books and art supplies that filled her personal space. She looked up as he entered, her expression curious about the adult conversation she'd overheard fragments of. "Dad, are we going to move away from Stone Creek?" The question caught him off guard. Why would you think that? Because we have money. Now, and sometimes when people get money, they move to bigger places. Emma's family moved to Denver when her dad got promoted. Marcus sat on the edge of her bed, recognizing the fear beneath the casual question. Isabella had already experienced one major life disruption when they'd moved to Stone Creek after Rachel's death. The prospect of another upheaval, even a positive one, would naturally cause anxiety. "We're not moving away, sweetheart. Stone Creek is our home now. The money just means we can make our life here better, not that we need to go somewhere else. Promise?" "I promise. But we might need to travel sometimes for your doctor appointments. There's a specialist in Denver who might be able to help your breathing problems." Isabella considered this information with the seriousness that chronic illness had taught her. "Will the treatments hurt? I don't know yet. But whatever happens, we'll face it together, just like we always have. And if the treatments work, I could play soccer like the other kids." The hopeful question broke Marcus's heart with its simple desire for normal childhood experiences that asthma had placed beyond reach. "Maybe, honey, that's what we're going to find out." The next morning brought a steady stream of visitors to Stewart's Auto Repair, each drawn by curiosity about the previous day's events and Marcus's transformation from quiet mechanic to celebrated genius. By 10 o'clock, the garage had received calls from 3 newspapers, 2 television stations, and a reporter from a national automotive magazine. Tommy fielded the media inquiries with the protective instincts of someone who'd watched Marcus carefully guard his privacy for 3 years. "Dr. Brown isn't giving interviews right now," became his standard response. "He's focused on his regular work and his family." But the attention was impossible to ignore completely. A crew from the local TV station set up outside the garage, filming segments about Stone Creek's unlikely engineering hero. The story had captured public imagination in ways that went beyond simple human interest, touching on themes of hidden talent, small-town values, and the triumph of expertise over arrogance. Marcus tried to maintain normal routines, working on scheduled repairs, while answering increasingly sophisticated questions from visitors who'd driven considerable distances to meet the man who'd solved Victor Fairfax's impossible puzzle. Among them was Professor Elizabeth Harris, Rachel's former mentor from the university, who'd made the 3-hour drive from Boulder specifically to reconnect with her deceased student's husband. "Marcus," she said, embracing him warmly, "I heard about what happened yesterday. Rachel would be so proud of how you've honored her work." "Professor Harris, I can't believe you came all this way." "Of course I came. What you accomplished wasn't just an engineering solution. It was a vindication of everything Rachel believed about the practical applications of theoretical research." She gestured toward the busy garage around them. "And look what you've built here, a life that balances intellectual challenge with community service." They talked for an hour about Rachel's research, Marcus's current work, and the potential for the technical training program he was considering. Professor Harris offered to help design curriculum and recruit qualified instructors, turning the vague concept into a realistic educational initiative. "I have contacts throughout the automotive industry who would support this kind of program," she explained. "Equipment donations, internship opportunities, job placement assistance. The key is creating something that serves real community needs rather than just impressive marketing materials." As the day progressed, Marcus began to understand that his victory over Fairfax represented more than personal vindication. It had become a symbol of possibility for small communities everywhere, proof that excellence could flourish outside major metropolitan centers if it was properly nurtured and supported. Jake Rogers approached him during the lunch break, his expression mixing excitement with uncertainty. "Marcus, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about the training program. Would there be opportunities for existing mechanics to learn some of these advanced techniques?" "Absolutely. The program would serve working professionals as well as students, continuing education, specialized certifications, exposure to emerging technologies. Because I'd like to be involved if possible. Not just as a student, but maybe helping to teach some of the basic courses." Marcus smiled, recognizing Jake's desire to contribute meaningfully to something larger than daily automotive repair. "I was hoping you'd feel that way. This program will only succeed if it's built by people who understand both the technical requirements and the community context." Bobby Miller joined their conversation, his young face bright with enthusiasm. "Mr. Brown, my cousin in Denver, heard about what happened yesterday. He works for one of those big engineering firms, and he said they're all talking about your solution to the hybrid problem." "What are they saying?" "That you made them all look foolish by solving something they couldn't figure out with a fraction of their resources, but also that your approach was brilliant and they wished they'd thought of it first." The recognition from his former professional peers felt gratifying in ways Marcus hadn't expected. For 3 years, he'd wondered whether his skills had atrophied during his exile from high-level engineering work. Yesterday's success had proved that expertise, once mastered, never truly disappeared. That evening, as Marcus helped Isabella with her homework and prepared dinner in their modest kitchen, he reflected on how much had changed in 24 hours. While the essential rhythms of their life remained comfortingly constant, they were still father and daughter, still a family building their future together one day at a time, but now they were building from a foundation of security rather than survival, with resources that would allow them to choose opportunities rather than simply endure circumstances. The difference felt profound, not because money had changed who they were, but because it had freed them to become who they were meant to be. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the newly constructed training facility adjacent to Stewart's Auto. Repair watching Bobby Miller explain fuel injection principles to a class of 12 students who'd traveled from across Colorado to attend the inaugural session of the Stone Creek Technical Institute. The building still smelled of fresh paint and new equipment, but the eager faces of the students and the confident expertise of the instructors proved that the vision had become reality. The key, Bobby was saying, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd mastered both theory and practice, is understanding that fuel injection isn't just about delivering gasoline to the engine. It's about delivering the right amount at precisely the right moment to optimize both power and efficiency. Marcus smiled, remembering his own early fascination with the intricate timing that made internal combustion engines work. Bobby had transformed. From an enthusiastic amateur to a competent instructor, his natural teaching ability enhanced by the advanced training he'd received from Professor Harris and her team of curriculum developers. The morning classes were just one part of the Institute's comprehensive program. Afternoons were reserved for hands-on workshops where students worked on real vehicles under the supervision of experienced mechanics. Evenings featured lectures from visiting experts who shared cutting-edge developments in automotive technology. The entire program was designed to bridge the gap between traditional mechanical skills and the sophisticated systems that defined modern vehicles. "Dr. Brown," came a voice from behind him. Marcus turned to find Sarah Mitchell, the Institute's program coordinator, approaching with a stack of applications in her hands. "We've received enrollment requests for the fall semester from 43 students, including 6 from out of state." "That's excellent news. Do we have capacity for that many?" "We'll need to add another instructor and expand the workshop space. But yes, the demand is clearly there." Marcus nodded, pleased but not surprised by the program's success. The combination of practical training, theoretical education, and real-world application had proven attractive to students who wanted more than either traditional trade schools or academic programs typically offered. The success of the Institute represented more than educational achievement. It had become a symbol of economic renewal for Stone Creek and surrounding communities. Students brought money to local businesses, graduated mechanics found employment throughout the region, and the program's reputation attracted attention from automotive manufacturers seeking skilled technicians. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "We've received an inquiry from the state community college system about establishing a formal partnership. They're interested in offering associate degrees to students who complete our certificate programs. That would be a significant step forward. Have you discussed it with Professor Harris?" "She's scheduled to visit next week specifically to explore the possibility. She thinks we could become a model for rural technical education programs throughout the Mountain West." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Isabella, who burst through the Institute's front doors with the boundless energy that had returned following her successful treatment in Denver. At 10 years old, she was now taller, healthier, and more confident than Marcus had dared hope possible 6 months earlier. "Dad, guess what?" she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the workshop floor. "Mrs. Turner said I can be the team captain for the science fair project about renewable energy." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. What's your project about?" "We're building a model car that runs on solar power and explaining how it's similar to electric cars but different from hybrid cars. Emma and I are going to test how fast it goes under different lighting conditions." Marcus marveled at his daughter's casual fluency with concepts that had once been the exclusive domain of advanced engineers. The Institute's presence in Stone Creek had created an environment where technical literacy was simply part of everyday conversation, where children grew up understanding that complex problems could be solved through careful analysis and creative thinking. "That sounds like an excellent project. Do you need any help with the engineering calculations?" "Maybe a little, But Mrs. Turner says we should try to figure it out ourselves first, then ask for help if we get stuck. Mrs. Turner is right. The best learning happens when you struggle with problems, just long enough to really understand them. Isabella nodded seriously, then brightened as she spotted Jake Rogers entering the building. Mr. Rogers, are you teaching the advanced diagnostics class today? I am indeed, Isabella. Want to watch for a few minutes before you head home? She looked to Marcus for permission, which he granted with a smile. Isabella had become the Institute's unofficial mascot, her presence a reminder that technical education was ultimately about building better futures for the next generation. As Isabella joined the students gathering around Jake's demonstration, Marcus reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. The frightened man who'd accepted Victor Fairfax's challenge had been replaced by someone who embraced both his engineering expertise and his role as a community builder. The financial security from the licensing agreements had exceeded even Rebecca. Fairfax's projections. Production of the hybrid engines had ramped up faster than anticipated, generating royalty payments that ensured the Institute's long-term sustainability while providing Marcus and Isabella with generational wealth. But more important than the money was the sense of purpose that came from using Rachel's theoretical work to create practical benefits for real people. Tommy Stewart approached, moving with the careful deliberation that had become necessary since his hip replacement surgery 3 months earlier. At 68, he'd officially retired from daily garage operations, but remained actively involved in the Institute as a mentor and advisor. Marcus, I wanted to let you know that Jim Bradley's grandson is applying for the fall program. Kids, been working on cars since he was 12, but he wants formal training to take it to the next level. That's exactly the kind of student we're hoping to attract. Local talent with natural ability and genuine passion. Jim's proud as hell. Says his grandson is getting opportunities he never dreamed of when he was that age. The comment highlighted one of the Institute's most significant impacts. Young people who might have left Stone Creek for education and career opportunities now had reasons to stay, to build their futures in the community where their families had deep roots. The brain drain that had weakened small towns throughout the Mountain West was beginning to reverse, replaced by a brain gain that strengthened local economies and social structures. The afternoon brought a visitor who still commanded Marcus's attention despite their complicated history. Victor Fairfax entered the Institute with the same confident stride he'd displayed 6 months earlier, but his expression now carried genuine respect rather than condescension. "Dr. Brown," he said, extending his hand in greeting, "I trust you'll forgive the unannounced visit. I was in the area and wanted to see what you've built here." "Mr. Fairfax, you're welcome, anytime. How can I help you?" "Actually, I was hoping to help you. Fairfax Industries has been discussing how we might support technical education programs, and your institute seems like an ideal partner." Marcus raised an eyebrow skeptically. "What kind of partnership are you proposing?" "Equipment donations, internship opportunities, scholarship funding. We've been impressed by the quality of graduates your program produces, and we'd like to formalize our relationship with the Institute." The offer was generous, but required careful consideration. Marcus had learned to be wary of corporate partnerships that might compromise the Institute's independence or community focus. "I appreciate the interest, Mr. Fairfax, but we'd need to ensure that any partnership preserves our educational mission and doesn't turn the Institute into a corporate training facility." "Of course, I wouldn't expect otherwise." Fairfax glanced around the workshop where students were working on various projects. "What you've accomplished here goes beyond simple vocational training. You're creating a new model for rural economic Development, that was always the goal. Technical education as a foundation for community resilience. They were joined by Rebecca Fairfax, who'd been examining the Institute's curriculum materials with obvious interest. Dr. Brown, this program is remarkable. You've managed to combine theoretical rigor with practical application in ways that most universities struggle to achieve. We've had good teachers and motivated students. The combination tends to produce excellent results. I've been thinking about proposing a research collaboration between Fairfax Industries and the Institute. Advanced automotive systems are becoming increasingly complex, and we could benefit from the kind of innovative thinking your students demonstrate. Marcus considered the proposal carefully. Research partnerships with industry could provide valuable resources and real-world experience for students, but they also carried risks of mission drift and commercial pressure. Let me discuss it with our advisory board. If we can structure something that benefits both our educational mission and your research needs, I'd be interested in exploring the possibility. As the Fairfaxes prepared to leave, Victor turned back with one final comment. Dr. Brown, we owe you an apology that's 6 months overdue. I came to Stone Creek believing that expertise was the exclusive province of elite institutions and wealthy corporations. You've proven that genius can flourish anywhere if it's properly nurtured and supported. Thank you for saying that, but the real credit belongs to the community that made this possible. After the visitors left, Marcus found Isabella in the workshop, carefully assembling components for her solar car project under Jake's patient supervision. Her concentration was complete, her small hands working with the precision that came from understanding both the mechanical principles and the educational objectives involved. How's it going, sweetheart? Good. The motor is connected and the solar panel is generating power, but we need to calculate the gear ratios to optimize speed versus torque. Marcus smiled at the casual use of engineering terminology that would have been incomprehensible to most 10-year-olds. What approach are you considering? Emma thinks we should use the highest gear ratio for maximum speed, but I think we need to balance speed with the ability to overcome friction and air resistance. That's very sophisticated thinking. What does the theory suggest? Isabella pulled out a notebook filled with calculations and diagrams that rivaled the work of many engineering students. Based on the power output of our solar panel and the estimated weight of the vehicle, the optimal gear ratio should be approximately 3.2 to 1. Show me your calculations. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus reviewed his daughter's work with the pride of a father and the critical eye of a professional engineer. Her analysis was thorough, her mathematics sound, and her conclusions well supported by evidence. More importantly, her approach demonstrated the kind of systematic thinking that would serve her well in whatever field she eventually chose to pursue. This is excellent work, Isabella. Your mother would be very proud of how you've applied her research methods to your own projects. I wish she could see the Institute. I think she'd like what we've built here. I know she would. She always believed that the best way to honor scientific knowledge was to share it with people who could use it to improve their lives. As evening approached and the Institute's activities wound down for the day, Marcus stood on the building's front steps, watching students pack up their projects and say goodbye to classmates who'd become friends. The scene reminded him of his own graduate school days, when the excitement of discovery had made long hours in the laboratory feel like privilege rather than work. Tommy joined him on the steps, settling beside him with the comfortable ease of a friendship that had deepened through shared challenges and mutual respect. Quite a day, Tommy observed, watching the last students disappear into the gathering dusk. Every day here is quite a day. I still can't believe how much has changed since Victor Fairfax first drove up to the garage. Changed for the better, I'd say. The shop's busier than it's ever been. The Institute's bringing new life to the community, and Isabella's healthier and happier than I've seen her since you two arrived in Stone Creek. Marcus nodded, acknowledging the truth of Tommy's assessment. I was so focused on protecting what we had that I almost missed the opportunity to build something better. Fear of change is natural, especially when you've been hurt before. But sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began appearing in the clear mountain sky. Stone Creek looked much the same as it had 6 months earlier, but the presence of the Institute had brought new energy and optimism to the community. Young people who might have left for opportunities elsewhere now had reasons to stay and build their futures locally. Tommy, Marcus said finally, I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done. Not just the job when I needed it, but the friendship and the faith you showed in me when I couldn't show it in myself. Son, you earned everything. You've achieved. I just provided the opportunity to let your talents shine. Still, I won't forget what you did for us during those hard times. That's what communities do for each other. We support each other through the difficult periods, so we can all celebrate together when things get better. As they prepared to close the Institute for the evening, Marcus reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought him from corporate exile to community leader. The challenge that had seemed impossible 6 months ago had become the foundation for achievements that exceeded his wildest expectations. But the most important transformation wasn't professional or financial. It was the integration of his identity as a brilliant engineer with his role as a devoted father and community member. He no longer needed to choose between intellectual challenge and family stability, between personal success and community service. The Sarah and Marcus Brown Technical Institute stood as a testament to the possibility of building something meaningful from the intersection of expertise and compassion, of individual achievement and collective benefit. It honored Rachel's memory while creating opportunities for future generations of students who would carry her commitment to accessible excellence into their own careers and communities. As Marcus and Isabella walked home through the quiet streets of Stone Creek, past the familiar landmarks that had become the foundation of their new life, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought them to this point. The frightened man who'd hidden his talents behind anonymity had become someone who embraced both his capabilities and his responsibilities to the community that had nurtured them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight he was simply Marcus Brown, proud father and grateful member of a community that had taught him that true success wasn't about individual achievement, but about using your gifts to build something larger than yourself. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.